Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Lots we have to talk about today. The story still continues from last week. That is the barge collision with the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. And there's some new developments. And we've got this gentleman who is hot on the heels of this whole story because, how ironic or not, I believe there's no coincidences. Last time we got together, we talked about the maritime cases that his firm handles, even him specifically. We've got one today, and he is Paul Bekman, attorney from the Baltimore, Maryland area, joining us with the latest developments on this story. Paul, welcome. How are you?
Doing good, Steve. How are you?
I'm well. So let's go right to the latest as of this moment, and that's what was filed by the owner of the barge. Explain.
Yes, it's true. Within 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks of this casualty with the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the owner and the manager of the vessel, both corporations, filed what's called a petition for exoneration and limitation of liability. Exonerate me, you weren't negligent. And limitation, we had no privity or knowledge of any dangerous condition that would have been able to prevent us from having this disaster happen. And it's been filed in the United States District Court today in Baltimore. And what's required to be done now is it is posted in the local newspapers, and any individual or any corporation or any entity like the owner of the bridge can file a claim, not as a plaintiff, because it turns out that the owner and manager are the plaintiff, but as a defendant, and make a claim for damages in this proceeding in federal court. And that's going to take place very shortly because there's a very short time limit for people to be involved. And it's going to be quite a process.
Tell me about this filing, and does it go back to a law, a maritime law back in 1851 or somewhere thereof?
Yes, it does. And that's just in the United States. The United States adopted limitation of liability in 1851, which says a ship owner or those in charge of her can limit their liability to the value of the vessel after the casualty, assuming that those in charge of her had no privity or knowledge of any dangerous condition that resulted in the damage to the vessel. Now think about that for a second. What if the vessel goes down and can't be found? What's the value of that vessel? Nothing. And they can limit their liability to nothing. And you say, well, they have insurance. Insurance will pay. Can't get to it. And even if you do and limitation of liability is proven, you get zero. So that is the one big issue that remains in the United States in the maritime law that applies to all vessels on navigable waters. And that's what would be applied. And there are some little sidelines to that are important to know. For example, the burden of proof is on the ship owner to prove that there was no negligence or no privity or knowledge. That burden is not on the claimant. Secondly, they have to post a bond. And I can tell you, as we'll discuss here with regard to this vessel was 930 feet long. It was carrying 4,600 containers. And we've all seen containers, maybe not down at the shipyard, but on the roads all over this country.
Sure.
And 4,600 containers. And when they filed their petition today, they said that the value of the vessel and pending freight is $43 million. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but it cost $177 million to build that bridge, which is now in the water. So you can imagine the tremendous amount of claims that are going to be filed as a result of what took place here. The harbor, you cannot get in and you cannot get out. And Baltimore is a very, very big port because it handled all the big ships.
Now, just as a few moments ago, ABC News reporting they've opened up a little temporary channel. What
Good.
that allows, I don't know.
Probably, your 16-foot ocean whaler, that's about it.
Yeah.
But cargo ships, tough time. That should be prerequisite number one. And I can tell you the state is going to be on top of that, the Coast Guard, and to do everything it can to reopen the port. Because you can imagine, there are thousands of people who work at the port, longshoremen, harbor workers, vessels coming in all the time, loading, unloading. It is going to be something that deserves immediate attention. And to make sure that the channel is clear and that no vessels coming in are going to get further injured or damaged. And we have further damages. People may also want to know, Steve, and this is something that came about 100 years after the limitation of liability law was passed. And that is, there is a special statute called the Admiralty Extension Act that was passed in 1948 by the United States Congress, not quite 100 years later, 97. And what that says is if a vessel is on navigable waters, this was navigable waters, and damages something on the shore, or specifically the statute says a bridge, then it is the Admiralty law, the maritime law that applies. Even though that bridge is not in the water, on the water, people are on the bridge. And as there were in this case, so terribly, there were 8 construction workers on board or on the bridge when this took place, about 1 o'clock, a little after 1 o'clock in the morning. 2 of them were thrown into the water and survived. 2 others were trapped in a vehicle and recovered. 4 more cannot be located. So there are 6 individuals who have died. There are 2 individuals who may have had injury. The water was about 48 degrees. They were in there for a while. And what happens to these individuals and their families? These were workers, and they're working at 1 o'clock in the morning on board the bridge. Well, the United States has a provision that a special fund will be created to compensate these individuals who were injured or killed. They have to prove their claim. Their survivors, spouses, children, parents have to prove their claim. But it's the maritime law that applies. And in 10 states in the United States, we have a cap on non-economic damages, but not under the maritime law. There is no cap under the maritime law.
What does that mean?
Which means that it would be up to, and this is an action that is not filed in front of a jury. It's a court. The court will make the determination of the value of the claim if the parties cannot agree to it. But this fund, special fund that is set up, provides that it will be increased to $460 a gross ton. Now, there are some numbers that have been tossed around, but we know at least what the ship owner is saying, that it was 95,000 tons. And if you multiply that by 460, that's where you get to the 43,600,000. So that fund, the 460 times that could be that number, but there may not be enough money around for all the claimants to do it. So that's going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight amongst people that lost their lives and their husbands or their children, parents. It's a real nightmare.
Now, you mentioned before that there is a time limit on this filing today, the 1851 law or regulation. Why is the clock ticking at this point?
So we have rules, and those rules are contained in our federal rules of civil procedure. There's a supplemental rule. It's called Supplemental Rule F for maritime cases. And in it is a section that deals specifically with limitation of liability. And these limitation of liability cases don't happen all the time, but they happen a lot. I've been involved in them for over 40 years. I've tried several of them. And these can be very detailed things. And it's very important to make sure that timelines are followed, or otherwise you're out if you don't file a claim. There's also an obligation on part of the ship owner to notify the family of the deceased or the deceased at their last known address. They're going to have to do that and have to file a claim within a certain short period of time. Then I'm sure there are going to be claims from all over. And if people don't file them within the appropriate time, there's going to be notices in a bunch of different newspapers. They'll be out. So all of those claims will get together, and then their court will determine how it will proceed time-wise. And a lot is going to depend upon how many entities there are, and there are going to be a lot from all over, you can imagine. You think about it.
Not to get political here, there are calls from lawmakers in Maryland to have the federal government jump in with aid to start rebuilding the bridge. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the sooner the better. I think it's a wonderful thing. It affects the entire city. It affects outside the city, because what may be brought into the city is spread out all over the country. And we're one of the few deep water ports where these large vessels can come in. Otherwise, they're going to have to go all the way down to Norfolk, or they'll have to go all the way up to New York or Philadelphia. And here they are, and it means they're going to have to unload this cargo. The people that were recipients of the cargo are going to have a claim. If goods are spoiled, they're going to have a claim. We don't know what's in the 4,600 containers sitting here today, but you can imagine what there are. And everybody will be joining. So you can imagine what this will be. And one judge, in all likelihood, federal judge, will handle everything.
You've handled lots of cases before. I'm going to assume not one of this magnitude when it comes to maritime and admiralty in those types of cases. It's a big one.
It's a big one.
It's a big one. What does nobody has all the facts, all the details, all of that presented to us. So I'm rolling hypothetical here. Based on your initial look at this situation, was there fault? Again, we don't have everything here, but looking at the video, looking at the facts that you have here, and this is completely unofficial. You're just looking at what you have. What is your gut telling you based on the information thus far?
Well, there are a whole bunch of different stories that are circulated. We've seen some of the video, fortunately, that exists. And if you look very carefully at the video, you can see that the pylon that was hit was very, very close to the middle of the channel where the ship would have gotten through without any problem. So the question becomes, how much time was there for them to do something? And I've heard all kinds of different opinions about that.
Sure, same.
Should they have dropped the anchor? Should they have reversed the engine immediately when the motors came back on? Was there
I
something
to looking
navigational that could be done?
even looking at that video, I'm not far from a maritime expert, but studying the video, you see the lights on, you see the lights go off, obviously a loss of power. The lights came back on for roughly 2 seconds. I don't, the exact time I don't know. Then went off again. Don't know if they had enough time to react to that, what difference would have made. And, dropping the anchor on something that's going, I think the number was 30, 40 knots. I'm not even 100%
No, no,
sure.
it's below 10.
It was below. Okay.
It's below. It's just a very relatively slow speed. But there's other factors involved as well as far as navigation, and that is this vessel had been involved in another collision in 2016.
Didn't hear that.
And the NTSB has investigated and is taking a very close look at the motors that guide this vessel. And is there a problem? And if there was it detectable? So here we are. We're not even 2 weeks out. Everybody has their hypothetical thought
Sure.
about what it is. But that's just going to have to wait till we have the ability to look at the information that comes out and, if necessary, go aboard the vessel ourselves with surveyors and experts to look at everything.
Fortunately, we have one thing, a ship intact.
We certainly do. And it's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, I wasn't even aware of the issue back in 2016 that we can look at the engines. We can at least get some case history and all of that. For you, depending on how this goes, since you're familiar and you're in this area, this is your no pun intended wheelhouse. Is it reasonable that the families of those who lost loved ones on this ship could work with you to get the proper damages awarded?
I think so, Steve. I mean, all of the country is aware of this. This is a national story. It's something that, and I see the publications, every day, how many bridges are there like this around the country? And there are a number of them.
Yeah.
It's not the Delaware Memorial Bridge, which is a single span bridge and plenty of room to get under it because it's high. But Delaware spent $20 million to reinforce the pylons down at the bottom, just in case. So the question becomes, are there other places around our country that may be subject to this? And maybe there's a lesson to be learned, as they say.
Being the non-expert, my initial thought was, why would they build a bridge that can't sustain a hit by a vessel? But then you look at the size of the vessel, it's almost a quarter of a mile in size. The amount of momentum hitting that, I don't know if there's anything that could be done, and I'm not there, and we don't have the camera angles to support this. But why are we heading toward a pylon? There's openings in the bridge. I don't, I'm foggy on that. Of course, I'm not the expert. I don't see the video from those angles. Or if the vessel makes a turn, it is heading for one of them and it needed to, course correction, a normal course correction. I don't know, but I guess these are the things that will be looked at.
That's absolutely true. So there's a lot to be determined.
What at this juncture, what's your gut telling you? At this, just about out of time here. And thank you for today. Fascinating looking at this story, which is developing by the minutes. What's your gut telling you at this moment? And it could change.
I think that what's happening is the number one thing we need to do is we need to get the channel open. And we got to get the ships being able to get back and forth. And we got to clean out the bottom of that harbor. We have to find these people who were lost and give them the right passage that they're entitled to. And then we'll worry about the limitation case.
Wow. It just blows my mind that this goes back to an 1851. Is it officially a law?
It's a law.
Unbelievable. It's still, and it could carry weight or does, correct?
Yes, it does. It certainly does carry weight. There are cases that have made their way to the Supreme Court of the United States involving limitation.
It is just unbelievable. But interestingly, and I believe there are no coincidences, we did a podcast on a lot of this a couple of weeks ago, how maritime law varies vastly from a mainland, even if you're just offshore. And here you go. This is what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Final question here. Does it make sense for our country to analyze these maritime laws and potentially make some changes to some of them, especially the ones that date back a couple hundred years?
You're absolutely right. A lot of them are outdated. They're archaic. They don't make a lot of sense. The interesting thing about this provision dealing with the special fund is that initially it was $60 a gross ton, and Congress increased it to $420 a gross ton. So yes, that has happened.
Did they no, I need to find out here, clarity. Did they increase it knowing the laws in place and said, all right, well, that law's in place from 1851. And times have changed in the economy, so we got to take it from 60 to 400 something dollars per.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It makes sense because these incidents unfortunately occur. And there has to be fair and reasonable compensation for those that are injured or killed.
Absolutely. Wow. Mind-blowing that this can happen in our day and age. And, we have supersonic jets. We have all this transportation means. Here's a boat on the water carrying cargo, albeit it's a big one. And this happens. I think it's a wake-up call to our maritime situation in this country.
I think you're absolutely right.
Paul, how do we connect with you? This is just a piece of what your firm handles, everything from all forms of transportation, pedestrian, automobile, malpractice, liability, wrongful death, on and on and on. This is, again, in your wheelhouse. How do we find you?
So it's Paul Bekman, Bekman. And in today's world, you can Google somebody and find out a lot about them, which gets back to one of our other podcasts about making sure when you hire a lawyer, you got the right lawyer for the right job. My email is Bekman, Bekman, at mdtrialfirm.com.
I saw that law today. I saw that the owner of the barge was going to ride that, and then you appear. So I'm glad you did for all this clarity. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here, and we'll catch up soon.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.